I mean, I feel fine. I'm glad to be able to, speak freely. I'm concerned with the direction of the war, though, for sure. I mean, just the direction things are going right now. I think we've kind of painted ourselves into a corner, and I don't know if Trump's going to be able to find a way that he can get himself out of it.
I always say the thing about history repeating itself all the time, right? So we could easily look at Iraq, right? Paul Bremer goes in there, 2003, gets rid of the army, and then, says to the Ba'ath Party, oh, just go away. And then what happens? Al-Qaeda, and then ISIS, and then, I mean, is that not what's waiting for all of us in Iran?
Yeah, I mean, something much worse. That's why I get nervous when Trump or Lindsey Graham talks about, like, we'll just send the opposition guns. I mean, this never plays out the way it's supposed to. I mean, every bad actor in the Middle East at one point in time, we armed, and then we had to go back and take care of. But the problem is you just magnify everything times 10 because Iran is just so big. It's just so geostrategically essential that the problems aren't Iraq or Afghanistan size. It's times 10 and it affects the whole world.
So here's the analogy I'm going to give you. You'll follow this one. There's a group is in one room, and you're trying to get to the main group, and you get through one room and the next room, and you know that you're just one door or two doors away from where the decisions are being made. Where was Joe Kent in that door analogy? How far away were you? Right in the inner circle where after Benjamin Netanyahu speaks, leaves the White House. The New York Times had that article about it. Where were you? Were you 2 or 3 away? How close to the decision making were you?
When the incident you're talking about, when Netanyahu was there, that was in February, and so by then the circle had been reduced pretty significantly. So I was still 2 away technically, because the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, wasn't in that meeting. So I was 2 or 3 away, however you want to slice it. I wasn't primary cabinet. I was Senate confirmed director of the National Counterterrorism Center. So if you look up the statute, I was the president's primary advisor on counterterrorism matters. My day-to-day report, though, was to the DNI. So I reported directly to a member of the cabinet. So
did you get a feeling at a certain point you weren't going along to get along, and they were going to then close the circle, and you were not going to be in there?
Yeah, so in the lead up to the 12-day war, basically late spring, summer into June, we had, I would say, the normal standard National Security Council process, the Deputy Committee Council process. And so there was a deliberate decision-making process that was taking place then. I hadn't been confirmed yet, so I was kind of dual-hatted. I was the DNI's chief of staff, but also slated to be the National Counterterrorism Center director. Yeah. So I was involved in the Deputy Committee's meetings, the National Security Council process. And so there was much more of a robust debate then leading up to that portion. Once Midnight Hammer happened, they shrunk the circle down a good deal, basically to a small group of, I would say the Secretary of State, the CIA director, President Trump, and then maybe a few others, obviously the Secretary of War. But there wasn't the traditional National Security Council process taking place then. So
you describe it as a debate. So give me the two sides that were debating. What were the issues?
I mean, so basically it's giving the president options. So the lead up to the 12-day war, it was, hey, the president was still dead set on getting a deal with Iran because the president and the Iranians basically agreed no nuclear weapon. And so all the trade space and the debate was really on levels of enrichment, how the enrichment would be monitored. Would the Iranians be able to rein in their proxies? They were demonstrating that they were able to do so because the proxies hadn't attacked us since January when Trump came back into office. So a lot of it was giving the president options. The issue that we had really was dealing with the Israelis, because the Israelis wanted to attack Iran. They weren't shy about it. They wanted us all in on doing a regime change. They were trying to sell that. So a big, I'd say, courses of action we were trying to develop for the president was how do we prevent the Israelis from attacking Iran? And so an idea that a handful of us came up with was taking away some of the offensive capabilities that the Israelis have that we give to them, that we provide to them, saying, hey, you guys can defend yourselves, but you can't go on the offense. So those are some of the debates. There was also debates on how effective Midnight Hammer would be, because, I mean, the president, when he said, let's do Midnight Hammer, it was basically like he was sick of debating the enrichment argument, because the Israelis kept coming back and being like, well, if they have whatever percentage of enrichment, they're going to develop a nuclear weapon. And the president said, okay, fine. I'll just take this whole thing off the table and we will bomb all 3 nuclear sites that can do any kind of enrichment and just take it off the table. We did that. The Iranians didn't freak out. And so there was a debate like, what's going to happen after Midnight Hammer? And again, a lot of us were just like, hey, the Israelis are dead set on this regime change thing. So this isn't going to go away. So that was some of the debate, whether or not Midnight Hammer would be able to be kind of the final act of our involvement in this, or, we're going to get sucked back in.
And here we are again. Yeah. So it seems like there's the adversarial foes would be Iran, obviously, but then also Israel's in the mix too. So then it's like, who, at a certain point, you have to think like, guys, just like I'm sure Senator Paul was saying, America first. Let Israel fight Israel's battles. And this is the question that comes up all the time, which is why, Joe? Why are we fighting with Israel? Is it that important that we have an ally in the Middle East? I
mean, we have lots of allies in the Middle East, or we did before this conflict. We had the security arrangements that held together the GCC, that held together the petrodollar. Israel was a strong ally in terms of counterterrorism, but I would argue that a lot of the fights that Israel got us in the region were counterproductive to stability of the region, were counterproductive to our interests. Now, Israel, when it comes to having tactical level intelligence on terrorist groups, they're very good. The Israeli intelligence, I would say, in terms of counterterrorism, very impressive. Like in terms of studying them as a competent intelligence service, I could talk about it all day long. It's fascinating. They are very good at what they do. But we have led ourselves to be deceived that our interests are the Israelis' interests. And now the Israelis, again, because they're pretty slick at what they do, and they are very professional in the way they engage with us, having influence over America, they view that as a no-fail mission. They view it as a very critical diplomatic and intelligence mission. And so they are very good at spreading their influence, whether that's through official engagements, when they're officially sharing intelligence with us, which usually they'll mix in a lot of good intelligence, but then there's the stuff that they really want to get in the mix that drives forward their objective. And look, all intelligence services do this. We always caveat intelligence that we receive from other services with the caveat that this could be provided to influence as well as inform. And with the Israelis, I would lean in on the influence usually. And then they have the very sophisticated lobbying wing that they have in Washington, D.C. through AIPAC and through other major donors. And they have their surrogates in the media. They fund think tanks. They view this as a whole of government project. And so I think a lot of times we don't recognize that. We don't recognize that this is a concerted whole of government approach by the Israelis. And we tend to think very short-sighted because, look, the Middle East is complicated. I served most of my career in the Middle East. It's hard for us people from America to crack the code on the Middle East. And the Israelis are usually there, right at the critical time to say, hey, we can tell you guys what's really going on. You don't need to worry about it. Just, take care of this, that, and the other thing, and everything's going to be just fine. Yeah. And so I think we've got a lot of work to do to kind of get ourselves out of that mentality.
We are having new laws being written to stop China's influence into the United States. A couple of years ago, they said no more of this Chinese funding our universities. No more. You can't buy a Wi-Fi on Amazon for $93 that's made in China. Right? We know that they are trying to directly influence decisions made, stealing technology, all that sort of stuff. So I put them on a scale of 1 to 5. Let's put China at a 5. This might be hard. Where's Israel on the 1 to 5 list if China wants to be the number one in the world and will do what it can to take the United States down? Is Israel's best interest for Israel, obviously, since 1947, but at the same time, they would want a position in the world as well. Are they on that scale of 1 to 5? Can we put them in there as well? And not taking anything away from the Jewish Americans that love the homeland, but the forces of Netanyahu and whoever else wins the election coming up, it looks like it's basically going to be the same kind of guys. Are they on the scale of 1 to 4 as well?
I would say so. I mean, it's just different in terms. China has a different goal. They want economic hooks into our country. They want to dominate the economy. I would say though, with the Chinese, and this is an interesting case study, I think, for the Israelis. The Chinese also do realize though that they need America. They need the American market to sell their goods to. And so the Chinese are actually fairly, I would say, pragmatic in the way they engage the relationship with us. They want an advantage. They want to be in the dominant role, but at the same time, they're still mindful of they want American consumers to consume their goods. Israel, especially under Benjamin Netanyahu, the Likud party, and especially since really October 7th, the Israelis seem to have completely and totally forgotten that maybe they're going to want a future relationship with us, because they have gone full court press on trying to get us sucked into this war that they know is going to be very detrimental to us. And they've basically said that this is the most important thing, is keeping this war going, keeping the war in Lebanon going, basically staying in a perpetual war state. And I think that might work for them in the short term because they keep their country in that crisis level. Wartime presidents are popular. They can sell it for a certain amount of time that's existential. But if you just look at the numbers in America right now,
Right.
I mean, you've got the majority of independent voters, a majority of Democrats, and then a growing minority that's almost becoming half the party on the Republican side that is saying like, hey, we don't like the relationship that we have with Israel right now. And that's, you can only call people anti-Semitic for so long,
Right.
because most people are just like, what are we even doing here? And so in the long run, the Israelis, to get a short-term gain, they have really kind of shot themselves in the foot. And I've even talked to Israelis, guys I know from my previous life, who feel this way about the Likud government. So I would say, in terms of like their influence in the Middle East and the actions that we've taken in the Middle East, especially, since the post 9/11 era, the Israelis have been really driving a lot of what we do. They've benefited from a good deal of it. But again, this has been their single-minded focus, but I don't think they've been looking out for the long-term interest of their country.
Well, they're going to ride the Trump horse right into the ground in November. What's his poll ratings at 20-some? I mean, the midterms could be a real a slap in the face. You could go back to Barack Obama, right, where he lost 63 seats or something. This could be a bloodbath for the Republicans, and people are stepping back. And at that point, Israel's like, okay, now who do we have in the House to fund anything? Do we have anybody in the Senate? And then who do they get in the White House? I mean, do they end up with J.D. Vance in the White House? Is he an ally for Israel, or does he start to change his tune a little bit? It gets so complicated, Joe. Do you wish you were still in there?
I mean, I really liked my job. I did, but I just personally couldn't be part of this. So yeah, I do wish I was still there. I wish things would have worked out differently. I wish the president would have allowed more of us into the debate and the discussion. From where I was when I decided to leave, I felt that I'd exhausted all my options of being able to have my voice heard. And I think right now, the only thing the president's going to respond to, unfortunately, is public pressure on the political side, especially from people who supported him like I did. There's many of us that did, that supported President Trump for a very long time, that are very unhappy with this war. But also just, I personally, from everything I've stood for politically since I entered public life, I just couldn't support us getting involved in another war in the Middle East.
Ronald Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. So using that sort of as the frame for this question, did you misjudge Donald Trump? Or did something about Donald Trump change? Was it you, or was it the president, Joe?
This is the question. I mean, right now, I think this is the question that a lot of President Trump supporters are asking themselves. Like, did this guy just deceive me? I mean, I don't think he deceived me. I believe if President Trump was still doing what he did in his first administration and what he was promising on the campaign trail, I think we'd be in a much better spot. Again, President Trump's strategy towards Iran in particular in the first administration, I felt was absolutely brilliant. I've talked about this as a candidate and as a public person. He applied the exact right amount of pressure. He killed Qasem Soleimani, killed Abu Mahdi Mohandas, but then he backed off and he used our economic power of sanctions to bring Iran to the negotiating table. The Iranians were responding to that. But something did change. And this is another reason why I had to leave, and kind of leave the way that I did, the way that I wrote my resignation letter, the way that I wrote it. Because for the life of me, I can explain, I can talk in detail, where decisions were made, but I still don't understand how, this time last year, there was just no appetite that I sensed from the president. And I was in the Oval Office at the time frequently, probably once a week with the president for intelligence briefings where these things were discussed. And the president was bullish on negotiations. And he just, to me, he didn't seem very interested. He understood that like a war in the Middle East would be catastrophic. Like he's always understood that. And so I personally can't put my finger on exactly what it is that changed his mind so much. I do think the combination of pressure from, very high-end donors who had donated hundreds of millions of dollars to his campaigns over the years, like Miriam Adelson, but then also some false confidence that we got from the Maduro raid. And then I just think that echo chamber that they put around the president of him hearing on the official side, and then from talking heads in the media that, look, this is the time to take down the Iranian regime. President Trump, you will be historic if you do this. Look how easy it was for Operation Midnight Hammer. Look how easy it was in Venezuela. You can do this. The protesters are on the streets in January, and I don't know. That's probably what happened.
Yeah.
But again, at the end of the day, I still don't know. But I fundamentally think something changed with President Trump. I don't think he deceived us, but I do think something changed with him.
By the way, that cat does not work the Mossad. Does that cat work for the Mossad? The cat.
She's pretty slick. I thought I had the door shut, so she probably does. She's well trained.
All right. So then something changed. So that opens the door to Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments that she made. And it just seems so much circles around. And at a certain point, you're like, I don't know about the Epstein stuff. But what Marjorie said, which, she has her faults, but she is a sledgehammer when it comes to just what she believes, right? And she just pounds away at it. And she has, and like a sledgehammer, it's straight and it's firm. And she was just absolutely gobsmacked by the fact that when she signed the letter saying, make all of it open, give all the Epstein stuff out there, like you said you would in the when you were running, what have you done? Why do you want me to take my name off that list? And then the president calls her. Man, it really, it just raises more questions than it answers, Joe.
It does. And look, the president, I was surprised when he came out publicly and said, like, why do you guys care about Jeffrey Epstein? And tried to minimize it. If they don't want us to think that factors and that there's nothing more there, then they should just release everything, right? It's the easiest thing. If there's nothing there, it's the easiest thing to shut down. But the way that the president and others are reacting, it does make you say, what the hell is going on here? That can't be overlooked. I think, and again, like, this is something that President Trump promised. I mean, draining the swamp, going after the corruption, especially people who were, harming children, for God's sakes. That's something that the president campaigned on. And I think we have a responsibility to hold him accountable for that.
You're a former CIA guy. So you're training and the CIA, it's extensive. You're able to parse words. You can understand where a pause goes in. When the person's eyes look up to the right or the left, whether they're getting a fact or creating fiction. All this sort of stuff. It's part of your DNA, Joe Kent. So as you start to look at this story, all this stuff about the Epstein stuff, which one of your, spider senses is tingling?
Yeah, so I have to look at things on a broad timeline and look at pretty much everything. And just if you look at President Trump's behavior, the way he governed before, a lot of the decisions, the Epstein files, and then in particular the Iran war, it just doesn't make sense. And again, I was there for a lot of it. Like, and still, to me, I don't have a concrete answer of like this piece of intelligence or this one briefing from BB. That's not the case either. So for me, having to step back and take a look at, like, could the president be under, people will say blackmail. I don't think it's blackmail, because I think if there was something, untoward about the president that was in those files, it would have come out in 2016.
Right.
It would have come out in 2020. I mean, the guy's had a target literally and physically all on his back since the time he entered politics. So I don't think it's that. However, if you look at the amount of pressure the president could be under in terms of what is the Epstein network, it's obviously, there's the sick pedophilia aspect of it. But then obviously this network is powerful enough to go kill Jeffrey Epstein in a secure facility in New York City. So it's obviously much more than just a bunch of sickos. There's more there. There's another power structure that's there. And I still don't, I still don't think that we did a complete investigation on the Butler assassination attempt.
No.
There's a lot there that doesn't make sense. I tried to dig into that, was stopped. Charlie Kirk was one of the most vocal advocates for the president, but against the Iran war. And Charlie was in the White House a lot in June, advocating against the Iran war, doing it publicly, doing it privately. And then, Charlie's killed, and I was part of that investigation as well. And there's still questions that need to be answered there as well. And so what I think President Trump has always had a knack for, and this makes me think, there might be something more. President Trump has always had a knack for really taking large sets of data really, really quickly and understanding what the broader message or broader theme is.
Yeah.
And so I don't ever think things are like the movies and someone's going to slide a note across the table and says, do X, Y, and Z or else. However, if I'm the president and I know that like my own security detail can't keep me safe, they almost shot me in Butler since he came in, and then same thing down in West Palm Beach. And then he comes into office and there's multiple breaches of his security perimeter, one just 2 weeks ago. Charlie Kirk gets killed. We can't get answers on Butler. There's reason for him to believe that, hey, he's not safe and maybe his kids and his grandkids, et cetera, aren't safe either. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I am saying that you can't rule that out. There's just way too many data points from an intelligence perspective for me to throw away and say, like, there's nothing there. You have to look at all those. You have to examine them and say, is it possible that the president is under some degree of pressure, from who I don't know, but there's threats to his security? I wouldn't rule any of that out.
Right. Because if you think about the sort of philosophical question of what is your life worth, right? If I gave you $10 million, but you don't wake up tomorrow, the person who's not going to take the $10 million, if you just know your life or your loved ones could be threatened at any time, just remain quiet. Your silence equals, you being able to take another breath. You just put your head down, keep going, finish up the term, keep everybody happy, keep everybody alive, and just move on, right? Because is it worth being honest? Some truth tellers sometimes don't have a very long life. And I wanted to go back to Butler for a second, and then also to the Charlie Kirk. And then when you asked to investigate Butler, you were told by somebody in the FBI, there was nothing to see there. Did you also get the same reaction to Charlie Kirk when you say, hey, let's investigate this, why that? Why was the FBI going into Salt Lake? Did they also tell you the same thing? Did you hear the same thing? Like, Joe, just let it go. We got this.
Essentially, yeah. So when we first came in the administration in January, the Butler assassination was on the long list of things that were suspicious from the last administration that we wanted to look into from an intelligence perspective. So the DNI said, hey, look into Butler. So I went through what we could look at on the intelligence side. And now a lot of that was, what was the origin of we had been told there was an Iranian plot to kill President Trump. And this is all public now. At the time, it wasn't. Right. This is what the FBI used basically to say you can't go any further because there's an ongoing case. There's an individual who was just sentenced in New York. His name's Asif Merchant. He was hired by the Iranians, as far as we know. Came to America. FBI picked up on him right away. FBI then threw a confidential human source at him. So an agent that the FBI controlled. And Merchant basically said, hey, I'm here to figure out a way to kill President Trump. And they devised this kind of harebrained scheme on how they were going to kill Trump with a sniper. All of this was in intelligence channels. And so I asked the obvious question, so they kill President Trump with a sniper at one of his rallies, and then they arrest him. And then 2 days later, a sniper almost kills President Trump at one of his rallies. So my question when I read all that, because it wasn't public yet, was like, hey, what happened to the source that was going to be the sniper? Is there something that we're missing here? Because I've ran a lot of source operations overseas. And when your sources start hiring sources and their sources hire other sources, things get out of control really quickly. And you as the case officer might think like, oh yeah, my source, I got him completely under control, but you don't know the 4 layers below him that what they're doing. And so I wanted to make sure that we had complete custody of that entire chain of events. So I started saying, hey, is there any linkage, just doing basic investigative work, looking at like cell phone records, et cetera, of the Merchant case and what took place in Butler? Natural Questions was completely shut down by the FBI. FBI said, no, it's an ongoing case. You can't look into any of that. It'll mess up the prosecution. That's what they always say. So got shut down from that angle. I eventually connected with the DHS Inspector General, and this is out there too. This has been made public. The DHS Inspector General was looking into the DHS aspect of Butler, like basically the security failures, all of that, all those obvious questions of like, how did this random kid walk through the perimeter and get up on a roof? All those types of questions. He got shut down too on the DHS side and by the FBI as well. The FBI had primacy over almost all of that. I also asked, hey, Crooks, he's dead. Like, let's take all his devices and let's make sure that we get into them and see if he was in communication with the Iranians, with anybody else internationally. Yeah. This is just basically what we knew. He's an American, but he's dead. So there's no Fourth Amendment issues. We can take a look at his devices. The FBI first told me we can't get into his devices. I said, great. If you guys can't get into them, U.S. government has a $1 trillion intelligence apparatus. Let's go ahead and take a crack at that. Someone can get into his devices, or we should at least try. And then, a couple months later, I was told, like, no, we got into his devices and there's nothing there. Well, you fast forward a couple months and Tucker Carlson's investigative journalist is able to find this guy's entire online persona, and he is communicating with people overseas. And that stuff, to my knowledge, has never been looked into. And so, look,
Joe, the question is why?
Right, exactly. Why? I mean, and that I don't know. And Trump has said, like, yeah, I guess I'm satisfied. I had heard him say privately he wasn't satisfied with Butler, but like there was never any sense of urgency to dig into it and to answer all these obvious questions.
I mean, if I could do Tucker Carlson laugh right now, I would, because that doesn't make sense, right? And then the last attempt on his life, if that's what the guy was intending to do, Cole, to get into the room and take down whoever he has to take down. And then that's another one. Here's the weird part. It's like trying to put together a game of Clue, and it was Colonel Mustard in the study with a hammer. But like, how is the security intentionally weak? Do they leave holes for hoping something will happen, or is it just incompetence?
This is the question. And look, if the White House Correspondents' Dinner was one incident, I'd say, okay, incompetence. And I would say, what the Secret Service is professional. They're going to make sure that never happens again. But between Butler, West Palm Beach, and then people forget in 2025, there was 3 other incidents. There was when President Trump's escalator was stopped at the UN. He was left out there exposed. There was a New York police officer who basically off duty, fully armed, was not part of the president's detail, walked in like he basically was one of the members of the detail, went up and shook the president's hand with a weapon. I mean, that made the mainstream media. And then there was when the President Trump and most of the cabinet went out to dinner in D.C., and you had an entire table of Code Pink protesters who knew the president's entire schedule and were sitting right next to him and surprised him. So we've had multiple breaches of his perimeter. And then you have the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And so it's like, okay, guys, like I'm having a really hard time believing that this is just incompetence at this point. And then you have the incident yesterday. There was somebody who was armed, who was in vicinity of the vice president's motorcade. Maybe that one's random because he was close to the White House. But still, like you start getting this again. President Trump is good at synthesizing large data sets. It's what he had to do as a leader in business, and that's what you have to do as an executive, especially as a president. You have to take in a lot of data really quick, and you have to say, what are the major themes? What's my leverage? What's my vulnerabilities? If he just takes an assessment of his security profile, he doesn't need someone to slip him the note that says, like, you better do X, Y, and Z. He's like, oh, I got it. I'm not safe, and if I'm not safe, my family's not safe.
He has no trouble firing people, right? I mean, he's fired a whole bunch of B celebrities during The Apprentice. You figure, like, guys, who's screwing up here? I could have been killed. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. I want a whole new team in here. Yep. And they fired at what was her name? The gal that was in charge, Diddle or whatever her name was. It was heading up the thing, but that seemed to be just sort of a figurehead firing. So I'm going to go back to all the unknowns. Do you think at some point, Joe Kent, that all the parts of the puzzle, the big pieces that are missing, like why is he doing what he's doing? Is it Epstein? Is it the Mossad? Do you think at some point in our lifetime, we'll know the answer to these things?
I hope so. I think we need to have a political revolution in this country where we stop voting for whoever has the most commercials on TV, because that means whoever gets the most money from the special interest groups and from foreign countries, for all we know, they win the election. I mean, we need people that are going to go in there with the spirit of, we the people control our government, and we need radical transparency. I mean, our intelligence agencies, and I say this as a guy who spent a lot of time in them, they're out of control. The FBI is too. we need a ton of transparency to figure out just what the heck's going on. I mean, because if we even have to question whether or not our elected officials, if our president is under some kind of like duress, or if a foreign special interest group, AIPAC, the Adelsons, whoever, are able to get special access to the president and influence him with the amount of money that's in politics or pressure, coercion, whatever, that's a huge problem. And that means we don't actually have a true, republic or a democracy in any meaningful sense whatsoever. So if we don't fix this, and the problem is we need people to be informed voters, and we need people to say enough of this. I don't care if it's Republican, Democrat. We actually have to get people in there that aren't going to take the money from the special interest groups that are going to do the things that we say they're going to do.
Yeah. Well, as Ron Paul said that it's the end of an empire. We're watching the end of the United States.
Yep. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I agree. Like this war with Iran, unless the president takes drastic action, I just think that the economic implications are going to begin, or they're going to accelerate a lot of the downfall. I mean, obviously the American empire, like we're not very good at being an empire. We just don't have the mentality for it. Our founders didn't build us that way at all. But the longer that we've tried in the post-World War II era, the more it's cost us liberty, the more it's cost us prosperity here at home. And so we've got to reset that balance. Otherwise, it's going to be the end of the country as we know it. But
you have someone like Tom Massey who's willing to lead with great courage, and you see what happens to him.
Yeah.
And,
I really hope he pulls off his race. But I mean, again, they're dumping so much money into that. And so until people can kind of wake up and say, like, why am I seeing an ad for this guy every 5 minutes? They're mad at Massey for the way he votes, like, against the forever wars and the spending. And he wants to, declassify the Epstein files, like insanity.
But what about same thing with you, Joe? Like your kids will read about you in the history books. What do you think will be written, and what do you hope would be written?
Honestly, I'm a realist. I don't know how important any of what I am doing will be in terms of like Joe Kent's name. But I do truly hope, and I'm going to continue to work towards us taking back our country and kind of setting things right. What I went through in the war on terror really opened up my eyes. Losing my late wife in one of the wars. I will be damned if I sit by and let another generation get sent off to war. And so I just want my kids to know that I'm doing everything I can to ensure that we preserve our country, we preserve our liberties. We're not sending more young men and women off to die on foreign battlefields. And we actually still have a republic for them once they're adults, for them to raise their kids in.
Think about it sort of from a religious point of view. If there's a big sort of plan in all this chaos, for you, Joe, it's like your wife dies there on the battlefield. It affects you greatly. You decide to run. You don't win, but then you get this position in the White House, and then you get an inside look at what's happening, and it goes against the core of your character. You resign, then they just throw all this mud at you, and you still. There must be some plan for you and for other people that want to follow you and have that, or follow you in the sense that believe the same things you believe in, that this country is worth fighting for. So the question is, how do you put that into action other than a belief? Like, what does Joe Kent do next?
So right now, I want to keep speaking out as much as I can to hopefully influence President Trump's decision-making. I think he needs to hear from folks who supported him, from MAGA, from the Joe Kents and Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, to know that like MAGA is not happy with this, and we need to correct course. Going forward into 2028, I want to play a role in some way, shape, or form. I haven't figured that out yet, but I want this discussion to be front and center. It doesn't need to be all about Israel or Iran, but it does need to be about foreign influence inside of our government and the fact that we keep getting sent off on all these different wars of choice that don't make our country stronger. I mean, basically the American empire killing the American republic, the corporate power and the vested interests in our country that have bought our politicians election cycle after election cycle. I want to fight against that. I think probably going through the Republican Party is probably the best way to do that. But I think this is going to be a critical issue. I do think it's a place where we can either save the Trump coalition or we can build a new coalition that actually understands that this is going to be the critical issue of our time.
Yeah. The saddest chapter that could be written is that people become so discouraged, they just stop, right? Because that is basically a vote that doesn't count at all. They throw your arms up and just say, oh, pox on both their houses. I don't care. And then when you then sort of remove yourself from the fray, you're not even a spectator. You're nothing. And that's what happens in a country where then the people that want to have the power because you've chosen to do nothing.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's one of my concerns too, and I understand why people feel that way. I've talked to a lot of Trump voters who are like, "I'm just not even voting again." Like, if Trump couldn't pull it off, then it's done, it's over. But that's what they want you to do. I mean, because then they basically don't even need that many votes. They don't have to sell it to anybody. Then it's a done deal. We can't go out that way. We still, we still have a representative democracy here. We get to vote. We get to pick our leaders. We have to work hard. We have to fight, against the money and everything we've already talked about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a major concern. A ray of hope, though, I think, is the younger generation. I think because most of them are so online, they consume so much diverse media, that they're much more informed, and also like they've just seen their futures getting squandered. I mean, they're not growing up in the same country that we grew up in, and they know it, and they're mad about it. And so I do get some hope from the younger millennials and the Gen Zs and those guys too, especially. They're going to change the game in 28 and going forward.
I agree, and I'll leave it with this because I know your time is precious. I think Charlie Kirk was leading a revolution. And I think they were afraid of that because I think Charlie Kirk would have run for president a couple of years, and he would have had young voters that didn't see themselves as any part of a party, but just saw an opportunity of a future that was being squandered by a bunch of other people that had no regard for them. So one last final good word from you, Joe Kent.
I appreciate it. I think as dark as things can seem right now, I think what we just talked about and staying involved is critical for people.
Okay.
Don't give up hope. We've got elections coming up. There's midterms coming up, obviously, and then there's the 2028 cycle. So I'm not going to give up, and I know you won't either. Okay.
Well, I know you've lost a step because any cat that can breach your security to get into your room and climb behind your back.
I know, right?
You're getting weak, Kent. You're getting weak.
I know, man.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Anytime.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Bye-bye.